Okay, we're recording. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we have Sheryl Ferlito and Nancy Eberhardt with us, and they are going to present to us on the very important Word Knowledge Network. So, welcome, ladies. We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you, Larissa. And I'm Nancy Eberhardt. And by way of background, I've been a special ed resource teacher, a special ed administrator, had the opportunity to work in the very first Yale resource project on learning disabilities. But the most recent thing I've done is work in curriculum development, most specifically in the development of language, a comprehensive literacy program. And that is where I met Sheryl. And when we came together in working on third and fourth editions of language, we were asked if we would take the work that we had each done separately. Sheryl had written Sort It, I had written Categories, and the president of the company, Stu Horsfall, said, would you two work together to create a technology tool? And we thought, well, we're not passing up this opportunity, but what will we name it? And hence we came up with Sortegories because it was the combination of Sort It and Categories. And the rest is history, because here, 25 years later, we're back talking about this with some new things going on. So I look forward to talking with you this evening. Sheryl, over to you.
Thank you. So I am Sheryl Ferlito, and I had the honor of having Nancy come into my school district and be our lead trainer for the language curriculum. And that's where we met some 20 years ago. I'm currently a special ed supervisor focusing in curriculum in a local school district and have enjoyed the reboot of Sortegories third edition. So I want to welcome you to the second webinar at Mount St. Joseph. This particular webinar is about the Word Knowledge Network from Sound to Syntax. So we're going to start with a very important definition of mastery and how practice impacts mastery. We're going to talk about the Word Knowledge Network from Sound to Syntax, how the Word Knowledge Network provides us a guide for differentiation and purposeful practice using examples from Sortegories, from 95% Group, and from Whole Phonics Decodable Text. And at the end, we hope to have some time for some questions and answers. So let's talk for a moment about mastery. So when we think about mastery, we had the pleasure of having Jamie Peevler at a webinar with us, and she really brought this definition to our attention. When we think about mastery, I want you to think about mastery as a four-step process. Acquisition and fluency, I think, is familiar to us. I said, we do a lot of assessment in this area. We're getting much better at assessing fluency for accuracy and speed, but sometimes we drop off on the generalization and adaptation stage of mastery, and then we get a false sense that kids know something and they own it when perhaps they really don't. So we're going to help you get to the generalization and adaptation phase of mastery by using the Word Knowledge Network. So think about practice on a continuum. Not everyone needs the same amount of practice. So some students may need just a few trials and some will need many trials. And the data is what's going to lead you to that decision. So why practice? Well, Anita Archer says it best. Practice is another way to increase the probability of learning. So why would we be teaching if students aren't learning, right? So we want to increase the probability of learning. And Willingham reminds us that we have to get these procedures learned to the point of automaticity so they no longer use up our working memory and the students can use all their energy for reading comprehension. So just look at this lovely picture and think about when the goal is mastery, the path is practice. And many times we don't have the kids on the practice path, maybe at all, or maybe not long enough to get to mastery of generalization and application. So think about the ladder. Many of you have seen Nancy Young's ladder of reading and writing. And if you think about the students in the red zone, right, they're going to need many, many trials. And students who are more in the green zone, they may not need many trials at all. So practice does it does occur on a continuum. Some kids may need more practice in decoding than they do in vocabulary, or they may need more practice in syntax than they do in decoding. It just depends on what their data says. So we're going to dig a little bit into that data-informed decision making.
So what Cheryl's been talking about is what makes up practice, the stages of that on the way to mastery. And for the development of that practice, we have to consider what is it that we need to be practicing. And this definition, or this excerpt from an article about the multi-component model for teaching reading from the Journal of the Reading League Journal back in last spring, points out that now neuroscience has identified that there are 5 aspects that we need to focus on. And this is really important because it goes well beyond just the letter sound associations, where a lot of people are sort of focused on that as being what the science of reading is dealing with. But indeed, it goes beyond that to also the meaning of words, semantics, roots and affixes, morphology, and also how words work together, function together, which is where syntactic knowledge comes into play. Another way of thinking about this multi-component model is represented by one of our favorite visuals, or favorite graphics in the reading rope. And what that multi-component model is really telling us is that we're not dealing with just one part of the rope or the other, but we are really seeing elements of the components on both the word recognition and the language comprehension parts of the rope. This also harkens back to Perfetti's lexical quality hypothesis, which, if you're familiar with that, is basically telling us that the more dimensions, the more representations about a word, it's all of its forms, the more that's going to contribute both to comprehension and to word reading. And then more recently, the Australian Journal of Learning Disabilities published something that we thought was really overlooked frequently and thought it warranted attention here, which is that building up an oral vocabulary, having words in our listening lexicon, is essential for being able to decode words more automatically. It's that element that allows us to fine tune what we're sounding out to hook it up to a real word. As we often say, you'll watch some students try to sound out a word. They'll be saying the sounds just right, and then they'll look up at you and they'll say something completely different because they're not hooking it up to that listening lexicon. So we also have to be aware that when we're teaching students about words, we need to keep in mind having them in that vocabulary. So what we had did in developing our reboot of Sortegories was to frame this with the word knowledge network. And what we're doing here is taking those elements that was in the definition, that multi-component definition, and now basically operationalizing it. Namely, let's figure out, what are we teaching when we're going around this, this wheel or this network? So if I say the sounds k, ast, then I'm in the phonology domain. I'm in that area where I'm listening to the sounds within words and doing phonemic awareness. When I then go to hooking those sounds to the letters that represent them, I'm moving to the sound symbol, or the phoneme grapheme part of the network. And this is what's real familiar and highly represented when we talk about the science of reading. We also have the syllable unit in our network because, just like the learning the sound to spelling correspondences, that orthographic mapping that we want to get so that word is recognized on site, we want to begin to do that with larger chunks of words like cast in castaway or recasting. And so that unit becomes another quick recognition within a larger word. And then we want to move from that sound to spelling aspect, the code, to what do these words mean? And we know that many words in English have multiple meanings. So when I say the word cast, am I thinking of that stiff bandage on a bone that's been broken? Or if I say the cast put on a good play, what does that cast mean? Well, that's a group of people who are performing. Or what if someone casts the line into the water to catch a fish? Well, that's an action. That's a whole nother meaning. And what's important here is that students, first of all, recognize that words can have more than one meaning, and that we need to be sure to be teaching multiple meanings to build up our ability to comprehend more effectively. We also know that we can change the base word or that initial word by adding endings. I could add ing to cast and it would become casting, which is now an action that I'm doing now. Or it could be casts, and that would be maybe more than one group of people who are putting on plays. So morphology changes the meanings of words in important ways, and we need to teach that explicitly. And last but not least, it is not until we put words, especially these multiple meaning words, into the context of at a minimum a phrase or into a clause or a sentence that we begin to know which meaning we have. So we definitely are going around in the order that I just went, but again, based on what we were saying a moment ago, we also know it works in reverse. If we are working on the meanings of words, it can also inform and enhance the ability to use that phonological and code information more effectively. So important in all of this, though, is that we have underneath this network is a scope and sequence that is our foundation, namely that we are going to work from a very prescribed order of the introduction of the sound to spelling correspondence. This is just a little larger version that shows that if I take these particular letter sound combinations, and that's our building block, we can then build a certain number of words from those sound to spelling associations, and then we can use those to put together to create phrases. And of course, ultimately, I just didn't have room here to put connected text. We would ultimately want to get to connected text. And it is that building process and knowing the words at each part of the scope and sequence that then is what we apply in a series of activities from sound to syntax. So what we've talked about is the importance of synchronizing three variables. We know we're teaching a core reading curriculum most places, I hope. Some students need more help, and that's what tier 2, and that's based on the data, and we have to use data to make these decisions. And students who need the most differentiation are often in tier 3. But interestingly, that practice that Sheryl was talking about on a continuum actually kind of works in an inverted triangle, which is that the amount of practice, actually, you need less practice in tier 1 typically, and you need the biggest dosage of practice in tier 3. But the glue between these, or the connection that we want to emphasize tonight, is how important having a scope and sequence is, and wherever possible, that scope and sequence is the same from tier 1 to tier 2 and hopefully even to tier 3. Why? Because every time we change up the scope and sequence, we are changing up the words that students can use the code to decode or encode. And that is the biggest job. So if we keep changing the scope and sequence, we make it the hardest for the kids who are working the hardest to learn. And that just increases the amount of practice. So think scope and sequence as we go through this presentation. So it is the rapid access and integration of the breadth and depth of word knowledge and connecting it to linguistic knowledge that builds automatic decoding and comprehension. But this last sentence is what I really want to use as the springboard for the rest of what we want to say, which is such integration requires the systematic and explicit teaching and practice of all aspects of word knowledge and their connections. We can't leave it to chance that some part of this network is going to be learned if we aren't teaching it. And so with that, let's motor on through. Sheryl.
Great. So how do we apply then assessment, instruction, and practice to the word knowledge network? Well, this time of year, I can tell you that we just had a early release day where teachers reviewed their assessments, and they went back and they looked at the winter benchmark and they looked at the current progress monitoring to see, is the intervention working? And if it isn't working, to readjust. And if it isn't working, do the students need more practice, right? And in what areas? So it's very possible that you could go back and forth between that assessment, instruct, practice back and forth. And it could be in the area of phonology, vocabulary, or syntax, trying to get to those higher levels of mastery. So let's dig into this a little bit more and see what that looks like. This is an example from the 95% group, Rising First, where in the area of decoding phonology, phonemic awareness, they're asking, what are the sounds in NAP? N, A, P, sounds in NAP, right? And then we get into the letters that represent those sounds. Also in the 95% group, there's a pre-assessment in the short vowel product where they will ask students to say a word like ram, how many sounds are in the word, write the word, but then can you change ram to rim? Again, how many sounds are in the word, and what, using minimal pairs, what small change can you make in the word? So this gives information on phonemic awareness and phonics from a product that you might already be using. Think about what you're currently using in your building, in your classrooms, and what data do you have? And I put some ideas of data that you might have already in your classroom at the bottom of the slide. So if we think about practice, and we have, how are we practicing? We have words, single words, right? Out of context practice, but that's not enough. We need to bring those in context. We need to have practice reading those in context, right? From there, for us, we do that practice in phonology or decoding, vocabulary, and syntax. So we're really trying to go not just to decoding, we really want to work ourselves all the way from sound to syntax. And syntax is just that meaning in context. So a Sortegories grid will show you 3 rows. The first row is decoding and encoding. And we really want to stress that regardless of your product, right, you really want to teach in a cumulative, systematic, and sequential way. So even in the first row, going from sound match to map it to build it, it's cumulative and systematic. And we're going to demonstrate that for you in a moment. In the second row, it's all about word meanings, but it starts off with related, gets a little bit more difficult and categorize it, and then culminating in that row is analogy building, which is higher order thinking. So every activity builds on the one before it. But the key here is we're using the same phonology from the first row. So we're getting more practice in decoding by reading the words and getting to meaning in the second row. And then the last row is words in context or syntax. So now we're talking about morphology and Many of you attended Deb Glazer's wonderful session on morphology. And by the way, she talked about maybe not using these exact words, but she also talked about going really from sound to syntax in her presentation as well. So we're talking about morphology, we're talking about grammar sort, and then putting those words together to make phrases and moving to reading comprehension, and then eventually sentence fluency in level 2. So this is a demonstration of cumulative sequential approach from sound to syntax. The other thing we want to call your attention to is the types of practice. So we talked about what's in the first row, but when we talk in terms of practice, as Jamie Peevler was teaching us the other day on a webinar, which you can get on our YouTube channel, the first row is blocked practice. So we're getting repetitive practice of sounds and letters of a specific scope and sequence that we're practicing over and over again at the word level. And the next row, we're actually using the information that they learned and hopefully mastered in row 1, and we're interleaving that into vocabulary. So now they have to use their phonology skills and get to meaning. So we're using more than one skill here. The last row in syntax is where we generalize the information. So you really here, it is very important that row 1, or the decoding piece, is absolutely committed to mastery so that the cognitive load is not on decoding, and we can get to meaning, and we can do those higher order skills in working on vocabulary and context. It allows us to be in like that flow state of learning. I'm not getting bogged down on reading the words, but I'm really thinking about what does the prefix mean? What does the suffix mean? What does it mean when I change the order of the words? How did that impact meaning? So those are the different levels of practice. And we have a whole webinar on that. I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel for that webinar. In this case, I'd like to go back to the first row. And I'd like to invite you to take out your phone if you have it nearby. And if you would take a picture of the QR code or go into the chat and go to sortegories.com, a closer look, and you could actually do this activity with us, okay? So we're gonna take you through a couple quick activities so that you can see how this works in this grid. Go ahead, take us to sound match.
First, an important question: dogs or cats?
So when we pick dogs or cats, that will be our motivator.
Jam.
So our motivator here will be a dog.
Which picture starts with the same sound as jam?
Great. And if the students don't know the words, it's very possible we have students who don't know what those pictures are. You can click on the speaker.
Alligator, horse, llama, jaguar.
Right? So my granddaughter, when I did this with her, she didn't know what the jaguar was. So now she knows what the jaguar is. She's pretty excited about that. If you click on the speaker to repeat this, maybe I forgot. Jam.
Which picture starts with the same sound as jam?
Then the student would make the selection and hit the submit button.
The first sound in jaguar and jam is j.
Notice on the
The
submit
letter
button,
J spells j.
there's a little timer. At the end, they will be rated on their accuracy and
Which
their
picture
fluency.
starts with the same sound as has?
I'm going to make a mistake here. Yep, go ahead and make a mistake for us.
Oops. Click try again. Has.
2 chances.
Which picture starts with the same sound as has? Not quite. The first sound in horse and has is h. The letter H spells h.
Sortegories will give
continue.
feedback whether the answer is correct or incorrect in this activity, that we're providing the grapheme that goes with the phoneme, okay? That will stop there.
Jack.
Sound match.
Which picture starts with the same sound as Jack?
Free to continue playing at home if you can see the dots running along the bottom, so it tells you you have 4. On the full version, you have 10.
There. Something was blocking my ability to X that out.
No
Sheryl,
problem.
sorry.
That's okay. So that was sound match. Can you show us what map it looks like, Nancy? And if you're playing along at home, feel free to go ahead and do that. And you can click through this so you don't have to hear the Sortegories
First,
introduction
an
again.
important question.
But you always have to pick a dog or a cat so that you have your
The word
motivator
is
chosen for you.
back.
And now we're going to say the sounds in back and click
The
a tile
word
for
is
each sound.
back.
B, a, and then hit submit.
Back. B, a.
Feedback is
Back.
provided, whether it's correct or incorrect.
The word is from.
Get this one wrong for us, Nancy.
From.
Oh, I got it right.
Sometimes we can't help it. So so do one more so we can go to the Heart Dictionary.
The word is swift.
That's okay. So we're not going to do swift, but if you'll go to the Heart Dictionary for us, because I want to show them from if we did get it wrong. Okay, so if we got from wrong or we weren't sure, we could click on from, if you will, Nancy.
The letter O spells in from.
Right, so that is when you're talking about heart words, you're only memorizing the letter for the unexpected sound. And you'll notice we have yellow hearts. Those are temporarily, that they need to be memorized temporarily because they're not in our scope and sequence yet. Red hearts are pretty much going to be unexpected for ever, actually. So you'll have to just commit those letters to memory. But we don't want to be memorizing whole words.
Right. Okay. So I think we ought to move to the last one in this row.
Yep, for sure. And we'll speed through the introduction again just by clicking.
First, an important question.
Arf.
Now it's your turn. Build him.
Notice now we're going right to the letters and we're starting to build words. No more tiles.
Change him to hill.
So now we're chaining words and it's just one sound that we're changing to make the next
Change
word.
hill to hiss.
And so on.
And then if you'll click on the question there,
Change
for
hill.
the help.
Select a tile for help.
So
Two
it's
letters,
possible that maybe I need help.
C-K, spell one sound, k, at the end of a one-syllable word with a short vowel. For
So this is
example, back and sick.
really great for teachers who are learning the science of reading and learning the code, or paras or parents or reading tutors that just needs the
Change
verbiage on
hiss
how to teach
to
some of these
miss.
spelling rules. Okay, we can get out of that. Thank you. So that's the first row. Can you go back up one second, Nancy? Just 1 second. I want you to think about what we just did in row one. We went from sound match to map it to build it. And what I wanted you to notice is that we went from just sounds, right? With sound, with pictures. And then we progressed from left to right, getting more difficult, always staying with the same sounds and letters from the scope and sequence. Now we're going to take those, I'm going to take you out of Sortegories and take you into some other examples. Then when we get to row two, we're going to do the same thing with vocabulary. Okay, Nancy.
There you go. Sorry.
That's okay. So this is an example from whole phonics, right? A decodable text, the thick fog. And the focus here is on the TH digraph. So we have a couple sentences from the thick fog. And we might ask students to find the TH, but your focus is on phonology. So you might, highlight the words that have a TH or point to the words that have a TH. Oh, you found thick. Very good. What's the first sound in thick? Someone else might say, well, it's the same sound as then. And then you can talk about the difference between voiced and voiceless TH, right? Okay, keep going. Now we get into the phonology. Oops. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then we talk about the difference between thick and path. So the TH sound can occur at the beginning of words or end of words, right? We also might want to incorporate, in this case, our sound wall and showing students what the mouth does when you're making the sound. You also could introduce heart words here or review heart words here with the voiced and voiceless TH. Let's have a look at they.
Hearts let you know which part of the word is tricky. The heart part needs to be memorized. The rest of the word can be decoded using your knowledge of letters that represent sounds. A yellow heart means you'll learn the way the sound is spelled later. A red heart means you'll need to memorize the sound's spelling by heart. Click Next to view words that have heart sounds in level A.
This heart word dictionary is built in Sortegories, so students have access to that. And notice the second row here of this particular heart word page. We have a bunch of words, and ask yourself, are they voiced or voiceless? That, the, these. Also notice that some of those hearts are yellow. If we haven't taught voiced TH yet, then we're going to have to memorize those letters for a while until it's taught. But the E and the EY and they are unexpected, and we'll just have to memorize those letters, okay?
Right. And just to reinforce, this would be completely based on the scope and sequence you're in. And that's why that becomes so important to pay attention to and define.
Right. For sure, for sure. Do you want to click on one of those, Nancy? Or did we already do that?
No, I can do this. Oh, I think I messed that up. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
Okay, where am I?
Nancy and Sheryl, we've had a couple of questions about the scope and sequence.
Sure.
The program Sortegories has a set scope and sequence, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And if on that same closer look page that Sheryl sent you to look for these, if you scroll down, you'll find our scope and sequence. We have 2 levels, A and B. And if you have questions about what we've covered, we can maybe talk about that later. But that's where the scope and sequence is that we are following.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sheryl, do you want to go through this?
Let's talk about some decoding here with high frequency words. Think about for a minute, how many sounds are in and? That one? A, n, d, not too tricky. But how about R? How many sounds are in R? I'll give you a minute to think about that. You can click Nancy one time. Okay, let's see if you got it right. How many sounds are in R? Yeah, it's just one sound, R. But it's confusing because there's 2 hearts, but we don't hear the E, right? So if you were in the heart word dictionary, it would explain that, not only for the students, but for the teachers, right? So give yourself a minute and do the next 3 words on your own. Okay, Nancy, you want to click through those? B, B, E, do, D, U, down, D, ow. Good, thanks. All right, so now we're back to decodable text, right? And we have, we're still working on TH as our focus. Click one more time, please. And so we're talking about syllables, right? So in this case, if you can read sun, you can apply your knowledge to a longer word like sunny. If you can read sun, you can also apply it to sunshine. Similarly, we have pathway. Empathy is a little harder. If they were to sound that out, they might get empathy and not really understand it. That's where that auditory recognition of words comes in, and that robust vocabulary will help them recognize a more difficult word like empathy. But if they can sound out the syllables, they have a shot at it. So next we talk about semantics in the word knowledge network. And this also comes from the 95% group, rising 3rd grade. And this particular example was chosen because of the vocabulary that's in this paragraph. If you look at the last sentence in the first paragraph of the good deed, it says there was a cast on his right leg from his thigh to his toes. Whoa, what a sight. Well, if we don't know what a cast is, or maybe we're not really sure where the thigh is, we might not understand why that's a sight. So we're really talking about vocabulary. We could teach it in isolation if we know our students don't know, or we can teach it in context in this situation. So that's how you would do word meaning in isolation, depending on word knowledge or in context. Similarly with morphology, we have full and less, the suffixes. And I know that Dr. Glazer talked about that, and I encourage you to watch her webinar. I think it's available for another 10 days or so. But it's, what are the suffixes? First of all, can you read the suffix? Hopefully you can, because you practiced closed syllables in row 1. Then what does the suffix mean? And then how can we use it in a sentence? So again, we're really going from sound to syntax here.
So, building on what Sheryl was just describing, what we're going to do is move into that second row of our grid and the activities that are focused more squarely on the meaning of words. And Kate and Oakhill point out to us that there are 2 dimensions with words that we need to know. One is breadth, just the sheer number of words that we know. But the other is the depth. And what we were talking about with multiple meanings and understanding what happens when we add morphological variants to them or variables to them is what gets us to depth of vocabulary. So we want to be focused on both of those dimensions. And we thought we'd take a moment. We spent a lot of time talking about the reading circuit, but this came to our attention, which speaks to why we also have to be building vocabulary. So let's watch.
For example, there's a small area in the middle frontal gyrus that reliably responds to hearing the word top. But it's not just one word, one location. A single word can activate a whole range of different brain regions. So we find the word top in a bit of brain that seems to respond to words associated with clothing and appearances. But also here with numbers and measurements. And here with buildings and places. We usually think of language as being restricted to certain sections, like the temporal lobe. So researchers were surprised to find activity all across the brain and in both hemispheres. The map was made by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley. They put volunteers in an MRI scanner and had them listen to stories for 2 hours.
Back in the front again, deep, and she pulls out a pack of matches that have been laundered at least once.
By monitoring blood flow to different parts of the brain, they worked out which places were responding to the meaning of the words, the semantics. They found that different bits of the brain responded to different kinds of words and concepts. And they could group them into rough categories, shown here by the different colours. Dark green bits, for example, were most activated by words to do with numbers, red bits by social words. Here in the right temporoparietal junction, this speck of brain, just a few millimetres across, was found to respond to words like wife, mother, pregnant, and family. And this bit just next door responds to some of the same social words like family and wife, but also words to do with places and people like house and owner. Generally, the concepts represented in each brain region relate to other functions that scientists already know about. So words to do with how things look, such as stripes, are likely to be found near the visual cortex. And although each individual's map is different, looking at these 3 brains, it's clear that different people have the same kinds of concepts in the same kinds of places. This is the first time we've been able to map the semantic systems of the brain in such detail, discovering that words are grouped by meaning, and revealing just how complicated and widespread the word maps in our heads really are. And the brain map is available online for anyone to explore.
Now, I personally thought it was wonderful when we understood the circuit that we were connecting the orthographic and the visual and the meaning, or the word. This blew my mind, and it also warmed my heart because Sheryl and I have spent a lot of time building into our practice, focusing on these semantic categories. So I just think this is a wonderful piece of video. So why should we classify? Why should we pay attention to this? Because we actively, our brain, I think that just demonstrated for us, is always looking for these patterns and these associations. And that is how we learn our vocabulary, is through this association. And when, as Fisher, Fry, and Hattie point out, when we have students classify things based on whatever variable, not just semantics, that we're having them sort based on, we're having them really demonstrate whether they're getting the concept that we are looking for, that we want them to learn. And when we categorize things, we have a system to organize new things that come into our range for to learn. So word sorts help students process their thinking. If we do it properly out loud, they have to put it into their own words. And we may be seeing that if we have time a little bit later in one of our videos. Whoops. So in row 2 with vocabulary, we have, again, 3 activities. And let's quickly take a look at related.
First, an important question. Arf. Select the antonym for out.
Now, in this activity, we're working on a kind of relationship, in this case, opposite, antonym. And if you didn't know that,
Antonym means opposite.
also, the word at the top is not necessarily decodable. The words that children choose from are based on the scope and sequence. And if you happen to not know the meaning of a
Click
word,
a word for the definition.
we have a visual glossary. So let's do
Out. Position of someone or something. Outside.
So our goal here is to select the antonym, and I'm going to just click that correctly, and so on.
Select a synonym for thin.
And again, if they don't know,
Synonym means same.
so that students have a help built within this, and that would be slim. And we're going to just move on to the next activity because of time.
Select.
Now, the middle activity is categorize it. Sheryl, do you think we have time to do this whole activity? Yeah.
Do it. Mm-hmm.
So we're going to show you a full activity in Sortegories.
First, an important question.
Meow.
Okay, I'm probably going to have a problem because I always choose a dog.
First, select the audio icons to listen to each category. Animals, names, and neither. Then, drag the words that appear here to the correct category. At any time, you may move words from one category to another. When no more words appear, click Submit to check your answer. You can use this icon at the top to view an example, or use the glossary icon to see pictures and meanings for the words in this activity. For example, drag the first word to the correct category and drop it. Now do the same for the second word. At any time, you can move words from one category to another. Repeat until no more words appear. Click Submit to check your answer. Words in the correct category will appear in blue. Words in red are not in the correct category. Don't worry, you'll have a second try to get as many words correct as you can. Now it's your turn. Put each word in the correct category.
Now, the headings or the category labels may not be decodable. And in fact, none of these are based on our scope and sequence. So we can listen
Animals,
to the words
names,
that we don't know how to read
neither.
based on our scope and sequence. Now, I'm going to very quickly do this, make a few mistakes so that I can show you something here.
So Nancy, while you're doing that, I'm going to answer a question in the chat. I made reference to the full activity. On the website, when you're in Try It, you're just getting a sample. Notice along the bottom, there are 10 dots here. Nancy's actually doing the full activity for Categorize It here. And this is an example of seeing it from beginning to end. On the website, you just get a small glimpse. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so I've sorted all 10 words and I'm going to hit.
Good try. Words in blue are in the right category. Try again with the words in red.
Okay, so now I've made 2 mistakes. I'm not sure what's wrong. So I'm going to use my glossary and come up here. I missed.
Select a word to see and hear the definition.
I read it as cats. Let's see.
Cast.
Oh,
A stiff bandage for a broken bone.
okay. It's not cats, it's cast. Okay. And then the other one that I missed was this.
Mat. A small piece of carpet for the floor.
I know Matt as a name. I made a mistake.
Mat.
There's Matt,
A
the name.
name.
Now that I've used my glossary to figure that out, I'm going to go back and I'm going to straighten this out and submit again.
Great job. All 10 words are correct. Wonderful. You earned a ribbon. Click a pet to feed it. When you are done, click Continue. Here are your results.
Now, if I had made mistakes, a teacher later could go and see where the errors are. Maybe there's a pattern to the kinds of words that are being missed or the types of items. So that gives you a printable record of what the student has done.
Thank you. For every 10,000 points scored on Sortegories, we will make a donation to feed rescue animals. The more points you earn, the more we can help together.
And that, as Sheryl said, is a full activity from beginning to end. In this particular case was categorize it. And then our last activity in this row, and we want to show this because as Sheryl said, things build from left to right within each row.
First, an important question.
Okay, we always have to answer this for the reward system.
Sheep is to wool as spider is to... Correct. Sheep is to wool as spider is to silk.
And this is obviously a part-whole relationship.
Water is to waves as air is to... Correct. Water is to waves as air is to wind. Up is to down as front is to...
Now, I'm not sure I understand that relationship, so I can come up and get a hint.
Up is the opposite of down.
And in this, we talked about opposites in related, the first activity in this row. So here we're practicing an analogy that's building upon that word relationship. And so up is front is to back.
Correct. Up is to down as front is to back.
And we have an illustration. So again, row 2, we are going from left to right. We build from one activity to the next. And then I want to just point out, this is another analogy. And sometimes words that are decodable early on in our activities using the scope and sequence may appear as one of the choices. It may not be the answer, but we keep recycling these words, interleaving these words so that students are seeing them in a variety of novel situations, whether it's the right answer or not. Sheryl, you want to add anything before I move on?
No, it's doing great.
Okay, so we can, using the decodable text with these ideas in mind, we can work on semantics. So for example, if we have in our minds that we want students to understand the vocabulary, we might ask, which word is a kind of weather? And we hope that they would then select the word fog. If not, we would tell them that. Which word is an antonym for thin? And we're working on the words that might have the TH, because that's a word we really want to zero in on. But we can come up with these questions about decodable text once we are working our way around the word knowledge network. Now, quickly getting to this last row, we are going to be doing words in context, and we're going to, again, go across the row. And I think I want to show the video here. No, I want to show this. And morph sort.
First, an important question. Dogs or...
Meow.
Now it's your turn. Put each word in the correct category.
Now, similar to the point we made with the categories, we may not know how to read these words. So
Ownership. More than one. Neither.
more importantly, I may not know what ownership is or more than one is, so we can use our help to get an explanation. For example,
Ownership means belongs to. Adding apostrophe s to a namer makes it possessive, which means it belongs to that namer. The cat's treat is a fish. The cat owns the fish. Adding s to a namer makes it plural, which means more than one.
Part of the reason that Sheryl and I have built in these helps is that when we talk about explicit instruction, it means we are going to have to define our terms, and we're going to have to be sure that students are learning this. So one of the ways that we think that this can be used, whether it's one-on-one in a tutorial situation or on a smartboard in a classroom, is to use the help, be sure the concept is understood, and then have the students go into doing the actual activity. And then obviously we're going to just move the words into the right category. And what's really important about this is having students articulate, why did you put this into the ownership column? Well, because it has an apostrophe S, which means ownership. How many of you have had students who, once they know that there's such a thing as an apostrophe, all you see are apostrophe S's, because there really is no understanding. But we think putting them side by side in these sorts forces an attention to the meaning that they convey, those different morphological markers. So moving out of this, let's go back and go to grammar sort. And grammar sort takes us to yet a new level.
First, an important question. Dogs. Now it's your turn. Put each phrase in the correct category.
Same idea with the microphone, but the help here changes, because now we're talking about
Adverb phrases tell more about the action. Some phrases answer the question where. Where tells a place. The dog ran in the grass.
and so on. So the idea is that students have to understand the meaning of words when they come together in a phrase. And on the doc would tell me where, and in a panic tells me how, and so on. So the next part of this is to show you that this can also be applied when we're looking at the decodable text. We could ask at morphology and then the decodable text. Okay, why did that not work? So we can, in Sortegories, we have students, when they get to that last activity of phrase building, that's what I skipped, is to have them first build a phrase, and then once they build a phrase, answer the question, what did that phrase mean? And let's go to this. What we'd love for you to watch, not only the interaction between the tutor, which happens to be Jennifer Ferlito, for those of you who may know Jen, and the student, is how much she's able to work on the student's oral language production and the time it's taking the student to process. How I think these are significant factors. So here we go.
Build the cat.
Okay, so you're going to build phrases. And I want you to know that phrases are a group of words and we use them to build sentences. So these phrases are going to be parts of sentences, okay? So we're going to click this and listen again for what it told you to build, okay?
Build the cat.
So it said build the cat. So you're going to find the words with your mouse and you're going to drag them to build the cat. Great job. You built the phrase, the cat. Can you read that?
The cat.
Good. Now click submit.
What question does this phrase answer?
So now we're going to click the help information. It's the question mark at the top of your screen, and we're going to see how this part works. So go ahead and click play.
What did it? Tells us the name of the thing or object. The cab stopped. What stopped? The cab. What did it do? Tells us the action that the thing or object did. The dog ran. What did it do? It ran.
And so our phrase is the cat. So we put words together to make meaning. So a group of words can answer a certain question. So we're going to figure out what phrase this question answers. So the first option is what did it? And when we're thinking about that question, it's going to tell us a name of a thing or an object. So does this phrase, the cat, tell us a name of a thing? Yes, the cat is the thing. So go ahead and click what did it? And then click submit.
I think that's good, Nancy. Oh, good, it's over. We have this video on YouTube, and if you go under the playlist for tutoring, there's another video with Tommy, and there's another little boy that uses Sortegories with homeschooling. So there's opportunities to see these videos on YouTube as well.
So what we were just watching was this process in level A of building a phrase and then answering the question that we just saw. But in level B, once students have gotten skilled or know how to know what kinds of words are answering it, we are presenting sentences with the parts of the sentence underlined, and now they will click on the part that answers did what. So they would click drop their eggs. But in part 2 in level B of the sentence fluency activity, which is phrase building grown up, is we're now also going to use that whole ability, that idea that identifying the who or what multiple sentences are about helps us identify the topic. And those of you who might be familiar with the paragraph shrinking routine will know that this is part of what they're doing, is they have to zero in. So in part B, part 2 of level B, students will read the 3 sentences that they've done before, select the word, and then the answers will show them the repeated words or the pronoun reference that lets them know their answer is correct. And again, we can do similar things within using the decodable text. What did the sun do? We can ask that same question. What did it do? And we would hope the students would tell us it dims. Or what set in? The thick fog set in. And notice if I answer the question, I'm restating it. I'm putting all this into words. And we can't do enough, or too much, I should say, of that oral practice. And what phrase tells us where? And hopefully they would say, on the path tells us where. So what we are demonstrating is, what we've tried to demonstrate is that we have activities that are designed systematically, cumulatively, explicitly to work on each of these components of language development and literacy development. And looking at it through the simple view of reading lens, which we all know isn't all that simple, we also can see that we have our activities that are working on word recognition, but we also are, with those same words that we can decode based on the scope and sequence, we have a lot of activities working on the language comprehension as well. So why are we doing all of this? Because practice leads to automaticity, which is tied to the brain reorganization that must occur in order for children to read. We're doing a wiring job. And based on that brain dictionary, we know we're doing a whole lot more. And as Seidenberg says, practice that links together these dimensions of words, multiple dimensions of words, can help develop this reorganization. And also, what makes things stick, part of it is practicing these skills in new situations. And what both Sheryl and I stumbled upon when we were working on Sort It and Categories years and years ago was that we were trying to give kids opportunities to do this, play with those same words that they could decode in new ways. And that's what Sortegories is about. But more importantly, that's really what the multi-component model is about. And whether you're using Sortegories or Ravo or Project Read Language Circle materials, or Deb Glazer's materials, there are other programs. Look for those features because that is what we want to do. We want to branch out from very singular skill focus. So where's that little thing to click? Wait,
So Louisa reviewed Sortegories for us. It's right near her face, or hit spacebar again. There you go.
Nancy, it's just so great the way you and Sheryl have integrated these layers of language into all of these activities. So it's just so much more than basic decoding. And that's exactly what we've always needed, not to have this artificial separation among the aspects of language that kids need to know. And it's just so beautiful what you've done.
Oh, thank you, Louisa.
Nancy.
We did a webinar with Louisa Motes, and she also has spellography, which fits into this category of this multi-language approach. So that's also on our website and our YouTube channel. So we're coming to a close, and I want you to know that there is a free printable on our website with the Word Knowledge Network. You might want to print that and stick it in your lesson planning, and as you're lesson planning with material that you have in your classroom, you will be able to just remind yourself that we want to teach from sound to text, to syntax. We want to bring it to meaning so that our kids have a fighting chance of getting to mastery that generalizes and that applies to their nonfiction text as well as their reading in their classwork. So thank you so much for your attention. We tried to answer some questions in the chat box as we went through. Here's our contact information. I don't know if we missed any, Larissa, or if I was able to catch them all.
I think we answered all of them. There was some great questions about, as students, make mistakes and correct them, if the teacher's able to see that on their end, but you answered that. And then somebody had maybe asked about as they move through the levels, maybe what does that look like for students?
So we're really encouraging teachers and parents to use the grid of Sortegories to, I don't want to say choose your own adventure like willy-nilly, like choose it according to the data. What do the students need? So if they're having trouble decoding, we really want them to start in the first row and go all the way through all 3 rows. But if you've got a student that's decoding well, accurately, and fluently, you may want to go to row 2 and spend most of your time in row 2 and 3. If you have students that know word meaning but aren't applying it for some reason, then they're going to want to spend more time in row 3. And you can do the activities as many times as necessary to get that practice. So it's not a program that's lockstep. You don't have to do one and pass it before you get to the other. But it is a cumulative, sequential a product that does offer scaffolding for students and teachers as they need it, because some of us have a difficult time teaching syntax and prefixes and suffixes and spelling rules. Everything the teacher needs is right in the help, and it can be used by students and teachers.
And just to reiterate, some students may do well, or they may do it as a class the first time, and then students can go and do the same activity on their own. So we have no restrictions on how many times in Sortegories anyway, you can practice the same activity. You may want them to do it again in 2 weeks just to be sure that they can still do that. So I think that the flexibility, at least with the way we've organized Sortegories, is to give teachers the maximum control on the practice that their students are getting.
Right. We do have Jen who offered to answer questions if she wants to share. I know that she has had an opportunity as a kindergarten teacher to use the I do, we do, you do with using it on a smart board. Also, there's a question, can we repost the slides or handouts? We don't have slides and handouts for this presentation, but the recording is unlimited, so you can get the recording at any time. And level B is another question that's popping in the chat. Level B is available. The second row is available right now, and it will pop into Sortegories as it becomes available. And we also hope to have the try-its available on our website for level B coming soon so that you can demonstrate it. And you can play with it a little bit. So there's a question about recommendation and observations you have for older students. So on our YouTube channel under tutoring, there are 2 older students. You did see Olivia, and Tommy is also on there, and they are in upper elementary. And the only thing I would suggest, although we are finding that older students are loving the feeding the cat and the dog, they don't seem to be offended by that. But if they are, just click through anything that they find is a little bit too babyish. But the fact of the matter is, our older students find success by getting the answers right, and they don't seem to be offended by it. My advice, I've taught high school, I guess I've taught every age level. My advice is just to meet them where they are. You'll be surprised what the older students don't know, especially when you get to analogies and syntax. Many of them don't have the knowledge, and they really enjoy learning it the way that is presented here.
And just to build on that, when we created Sortegories, it was with older students in mind.
Started out, right?
That's where we started out. And what we needed was to figure out ways to make some of this material repeat it without it looking so redundant and boring. And actually, that's where things like relate it and categorize it and analogy building came from, is that we really wanted kids to feel smart, but working still with some pretty simple words that they could decode. So that it's a lot are the way we present it. And if you think it's cool, chances are the kids will think it's cool too. And cool is probably a really old word. I don't know a current word to use.
Awesome.
Awesome.
I have 2 teenagers in the house. Sick.
Oh, sick. There you go. Thanks for updating us on that. It's sick.
Well, it's really unusual to see a product like this that can really tap into those components of word recognition and language comprehension. So I really love that reading rope, or the simple view at the end where you really framed some of the components within the product and how they fit into what we're trying to do with students. So that was really great. I love some of your visuals. Those are so helpful. And I think a lot of times when we are asking students to engage with technology around the things that we're trying to teach in the science of reading, it can feel pretty passive. And this is truly an engaging and targeted product for all of those components of reading. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you. And Julie Brown is telling us it's sleigh. That's
so yes, but she's right. She's heavy on the teenagers too.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to the next webinar with UFly, right? UFly product?
Yeah, so Dr. Holly Lane will be joining us April 25th, and we're going to be putting out some information and registration information soon. I will follow up this webinar with our recording. I know Sheryl and Nancy also want to share this recording on their YouTube channel, so it'll be available there. And then we would love your feedback if you're here tonight on other topics or speakers that you'd love to hear from, so that we can continue all learning and growing together around the science of reading and bridging that research to practice gap for teachers.
Thank you so much, Larissa. We want to thank Mount St. Joseph for putting on the webinar series. We're just really pleased to be a part of it. And thank you so much for what you're doing for education and getting the science out there to teachers and teacher colleges. So we're your biggest fans.
Yeah,
thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for your time and all the effort that went into preparing for tonight. It was just flawless. You ladies did such a wonderful job. And thank you for graciously agreeing to come on.
Oh, our pleasure. That was our pleasure. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.